In May 1939, 50 miles north of Berlin, Heinrich Himmler opened a new kind of concentration camp. Ravensbrück was designed exclusively for women, but this camp would become infamous not just for its victims, but for its perpetrators. Between 1939 and 1945, over 3,500 women served as SS guards at Ravensbrück and its satellite camps. These were not fanatical Nazis. Most were ordinary working-class women, former shop assistants, hairdressers, factory workers, and unemployed maids. Less than 5% were Nazi party members when they arrived. Yet within days, sometimes within hours, these ordinary women would transform into some of the most brutal torturers in the Nazi concentration camp system. Ravensbrück concentration camp opened on May 15, 1939. The first transport arrived 3 days later. 867 women from Lichtenberg camp in Saxony. They were political prisoners, German communists, social democrats, and Jehovah's Witnesses. The camp was built on the shores of Lake Schwedt, surrounded by forests near the village of Fürstenberg. Designed to hold 3,000 prisoners, it would eventually confine over 10 times that number. By 1945, more than 130,000 women and children from over 40 nations had passed through Ravensbrück. The largest groups were Polish, 40,000 women, and Jewish, 26,000. But prisoners came from across Nazi-occupied Europe. French resistance fighters, Soviet partisans, Roma women, and even a handful from Britain and the United States. The camp complex included 14 barracks, a kitchen, an infirmary, and what prisoners called the bunker, a building of cell blocks for solitary confinement where torture became routine. A high concrete wall, topped with electrified barbed wire, enclosed the entire facility. Just outside the walls stood neat rows of 3-story chalets with brown shutters, housing for the SS personnel who would run the camp. Between 25,000 and 30,000 women perished at Ravensbrück. They died from starvation, beatings, disease, medical experiments, lethal injections, shootings, and, starting in 1945, from gassing in a purpose-built gas chamber. But Ravensbrück's most significant role was as something else entirely, a training school. From 1942 onwards, Ravensbrück served as the main training centre for female SS guards. Over 4,000 women passed through its training programme before being deployed across the entire Nazi camp system to Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Majdanek, and dozens of other facilities. And they were trained by women who had perfected the art of brutality. How did ordinary German women end up guarding concentration camps? The recruitment began in earnest in 1942. Advertisements appeared in German newspapers seeking women aged 20 to 40 for work at military installations. The ads promised free housing, meals, uniforms, and wages of approximately 185 Reichsmarks per month, considerably more than the 76 Reichsmarks most women earned in unskilled factory work. The advertisements never mentioned concentration camps. For lower-class, undereducated women with limited prospects, the offer represented upward mobility. Many came from working-class backgrounds, daughters of butchers, chauffeurs, and agricultural workers. Few had completed more than basic schooling. About 10% volunteered in response to the advertisements. 20% came through labour exchanges, government employment offices, that effectively assigned them to guard duty. The remaining 70% were conscripted from factories or other workplaces. None were formally members of the SS. Officially, they were designated women auxiliaries of the Waffen-SS, civilian employees within a paramilitary organisation. But unlike their male SS counterparts, they reported directly to camp commandants and higher SS ranks, who were always men. The women who arrived had no special qualifications. They had been shop clerks, waitresses, tram conductresses, even opera singers. Some, like Dorothea Bintz, had worked as maids and hated it. The job at Ravensbrück seemed like an escape. Most were young, between 17 and 30 years old, and had grown up entirely under Nazi rule. Many had been members of the League of German Girls, the female branch of the Hitler Youth. They had absorbed Nazi propaganda from childhood, but few showed any particular ideological fanaticism. They were, by all accounts, ordinary women. Training at Ravensbrück lasted approximately 1 month. New recruits learned camp regulations, prisoner management, and the SS code of conduct. They watched propaganda films like Jud Süß, designed to dehumanize Jews and other prisoners. Officially, SS guards did not have the right to use violence arbitrarily on prisoners. Camp regulations specified strict procedures for punishment. Guards were supposed to follow a code. In practice, these regulations were ignored from day one. The transformation happened with shocking speed. French ethnologist Germaine Tillion, a Ravensbrück survivor, documented how quickly brutalization occurred. She noted that one newly arrived guard needed exactly 4 days to adapt to violent procedures against prisoners. 4 days! The training emphasized that prisoners were enemies of the state, subhuman creatures who deserved no compassion. Guards were taught to use verbal abuse constantly, foul language, threats, humiliation, physical punishment followed. Blows to the face, head, and body using fists, truncheons, or jackboots. They learned to set their German shepherd dogs on prisoners to bite their legs. The camp created a culture where brutality was not just permitted, but expected. Guards who showed kindness risked being dismissed. One guard, Clara Koenig, was fired in January 1945 because the head wardress noted she was too polite and too kind towards the inmates. New guards quickly learned that violence demonstrated their authority. In the hierarchical world of Ravensbrück, beating prisoners was how you proved yourself to your superiors. It was how you carved out power in a system where women had little. And some guards excelled at it. Dorothea Binz became the most infamous female guard at Ravensbrück. Born in 1920 in a village near Fürstenberg, Binz grew up in a lower middle-class family. Her father was a forester. She attended village school until age 15, then worked as a maid, a job she despised. In August 1939, at age 19, she volunteered for kitchen work at Ravensbrück, which had just opened nearby. Within 1 month, she was promoted to Aufseherin, female overseer. Binz rose rapidly through the ranks. By 1943, she held the position of Deputy Chief Wardress, second in command of all female guards. She directed training and assigned duties to over 100 guards at once. Despite serving under higher-ranking officers, survivors testified that Binz was the true star of the camp. The chief guard was completely overshadowed by her deputy. Her methods were savage. Witnesses described how Binz would beat, slap, kick, shoot, whip, stomp, and sexually abuse prisoners. She carried a whip in one hand and walked her German shepherd on a leash. At a moment's notice, she would kick a woman to death or select her for execution. French prisoners nicknamed her La Binz. One survivor testified that when Binz appeared at morning roll call, silence fell across the entire camp. She instilled absolute terror. Binz had a particular method for corporal punishment. Camp regulations prescribed 5 to 25 lashes on the naked backside, and thighs Binz typically administered 50 to 75 strokes. A death sentence. A witness who secretly observed through a crack in the floor described victims lying unconscious, covered in blood from their ankles to their waist. Binz was known to single out the weakest, most fearful prisoners, then shower them with blows. One documented incident involved a work detail in the woods. Binz observed a woman she felt wasn't working hard enough. She walked over, knocked the woman to the ground, took a pickaxe, and chopped at her body until nothing remained but a bloody lump. She then cleaned her boots on the dry portion of the corpse's skirt, mounted her bicycle, and leisurely pedalled back to camp. Binns reportedly had a boyfriend in camp, SS Officer Edmund Breuning. Witnesses testified they would take romantic walks to watch women being flogged, then stroll away laughing together. Hermine Braunsteiner earned the nickname the Stomping Mare. Born in Vienna in 1919, Braunsteiner worked as a maid in England before returning to Austria after the Anschluss. She applied for guard duty because she needed money. In 1939, she arrived at Ravensbrück. In 1942, she transferred to Majdanek concentration camp in Poland. Braunsteiner wore steel-studded jackboots. Survivors testified that she would stomp on women with these boots, literally trampling them to death. Others described how she whipped women to death, personally selected children for the gas chambers, and threw children by their hair onto trucks bound for execution. One witness recalled Braunsteiner seizing a child from inside a backpack, whipping the child for several minutes, then personally dragging the child to the gas chamber. She called children useless eaters and regularly punished them for minor infractions like wearing stockings for warmth. For her work, Braunsteiner received the War Merit Cross, second class in 1943. Irma Grese became known as the Hyena of Auschwitz. Born in 1923, Grese trained at Ravensbrück in July 1942. She was 19 years old. The training program typically lasted 1 month. Grese completed it in 3 weeks. She proved so proficient at brutality that supervisors noted she excelled her superiors. During her 7 months at Ravensbrück, earning 54 Reichsmarks per month, Grese participated in inmate beatings as part of her training. In March 1943, she transferred to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where she became senior SS supervisor, the second highest rank available to women. She oversaw 30,000 female prisoners. Grese carried a plaited whip made of cellophane. Cellophane allowed blood to be easily washed off. She also wore heavy jackboots, carried a pistol, and walked with a trained German shepherd. Survivors provided extensive testimony about her sadism. She would beat prisoners to death, set her dog on them, whip them until their flesh was torn, and personally select women for the gas chambers. One witness testified that Grese killed approximately 30 prisoners per day during her time at various camps. Dr. Gisela Perl, an inmate doctor, described how Grese would force her to operate on women whose breasts had been cut open by Grese's whip and infected with lice or dirt, using only an unsterilized knife with no anesthesia. Perl wrote that Grese experienced sexual arousal while watching these operations and would kick the screaming women if their cries interfered with her pleasure. Grese was 22 years old. The guards' daily routine involved systematic torture. Morning roll call could last for hours. Prisoners stood in formation in all weather, including sub-freezing temperatures, while guards walked among them, striking anyone who moved or appeared weak. Guards would kick prisoners in the face and body with their heavy boots. They would beat prisoners with truncheons, sticks, or rubber batons. The guards supervised work details where prisoners laboured for companies like Siemens, which operated a factory inside the camp. Guards routinely beat prisoners to increase production speed. Any perceived slowness resulted in immediate violence. The bunker, the punishment block, was where the worst tortures occurred. Prisoners faced solitary confinement in dark, airless cells with near-starvation rations. SS guards, including Binns, carried out official corporal punishments there. Whippings that often proved fatal. Guards would also use SS dogs to attack prisoners, ordering the animals to bite their legs. Guards competed with each other in brutality. Survivor Germaine Tillion observed that male and female guards would accelerate and intensify their violent acts whenever colleagues of the opposite sex were watching, a twisted form of showing off. The medical experiments at Ravensbrück represented a particular horror. From 1942 to 1943, SS doctors Karl Gebhardt, Fritz Fischer and Herta Oberhäuser conducted experiments to test sulfonamide drugs on battlefield-like wounds. They selected 74 young Polish women, political prisoners, many former resistance members. The youngest was 16 years old. The doctors deliberately cut into the women's legs, then infected the wounds with virulent bacteria, dirt, glass or wood splinters to simulate battlefield injuries. They fractured bones, removed sections of bone, muscle and nerve tissue, and observed what happened without treatment or with sulfonamide drugs. Some experiments involved amputating entire limbs. The operations were performed without anesthetic. 5 women died immediately from the most virulent bacterial infections. 6 were executed after surgery, as their role as experimental material had ended. 63 miraculously survived, though many were permanently crippled. The prisoners called them the rabbits, because they were used as laboratory animals. The rabbits managed to smuggle out letters describing the experiments. One woman, Christina Chish, wrote messages in urine as invisible ink. These letters reached the Polish underground, the Vatican, the Red Cross, and the Polish government in exile in London, broadcasting the truth about Ravensbrück to the world. In April 1945, Soviet forces liberated Ravensbrück. Many guards fled during death marches in the final weeks. Some simply disappeared into post-war Germany, resuming ordinary lives. Others faced justice. Between 1946 and 1948, 7 Ravensbrück trials were held at Hamburg's Curio House. British military tribunals prosecuted former camp personnel for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Dorothea Binns was sentenced to death. On May 2, 1947, British executioner Albert Pierrepoint ended her at Hamelin prison. Hours before execution, Binns attempted ending herself, but officials intervened. She was ended at 9:01 a.m. Irma Grisi stood trial at the Bergen-Belsen trials in 1945. Survivors provided devastating testimony about her cruelty. She was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging on December 13, 1945, at age 22. She became the youngest Nazi war criminal executed after World War II. Walking to the gallows, her final word was schnell, meaning quickly. Hermine Braunsteiner escaped to Austria after the war. She was arrested but received only 3 years in prison, released in 1950 after serving just 4 months. In 1958, she married an American serviceman named Russell Ryan and emigrated to the United States, settling in Queens, New York. She lived as a quiet housewife for years until Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal tracked her down. In 1973, Hermine Braunsteiner Ryan became the first Nazi war criminal extradited from the United States to West Germany. After a lengthy trial, she was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1981 for murder and crimes against humanity. She was released in 1996 due to diabetes and leg amputation, dying in 1999. But most guards never faced trial. Of approximately 3,500 female guards who served at Ravensbrück and other camps, only 77 were ever prosecuted. Very few were convicted. Most returned to their pre-war lives, their crimes forgotten or ignored. The story of Ravensbrück's female guards forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Ordinary people are capable of extraordinary evil. These were not monsters born from darkness. They were shop assistants and farmhands, teenagers and young mothers. They had normal childhoods, attended church, went swimming in summer. Then they put on SS uniforms and became torturers within days. The question remains, what transforms an ordinary person into a killer? The answer lies not in individual pathology, but in systems of power. Ravensbrück created an environment where cruelty was rewarded, kindness was punished, and prisoners were systematically dehumanized. The guards were given authority without accountability, encouraged to view their victims as subhuman, and placed in a hierarchy where violence demonstrated status. Given those conditions, thousands of ordinary women became perpetrators of the Holocaust. The victims of Ravensbrück deserve remembrance. So too do the guards deserve examination. Not sympathy, but understanding. Because understanding how ordinary people commit atrocities is the only way to prevent such horrors from happening again. Ravensbrück stands as a warning. The capacity for cruelty exists in all of us. The question is not whether we are capable of evil, but what systems we build to prevent it.